Marcus Langley was the kind of man who turned heads when he entered a room. At 36, he had built an empire from scratch, a tech company that revolutionized how people interacted online. With his tailored suits, expensive watches, and perfectly styled hair, Marcus oozed confidence. But beneath the polished exterior lay a man consumed by arrogance. He lived in one of the most luxurious penthouse suites in the city, perched high above the bustling streets below. It wasn't just a home, it was a statement. Every inch of the suite screamed wealth, from the marble floors to the gold-plated fixtures. His apartment overlooked the skyline, offering breathtaking views that only a select few could afford. Yet despite all this grandeur, Marcus often found himself bored. He thrived on drama and attention, feeding off the admiration and sometimes envy of others. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Marcus lounged on his leather couch scrolling through social media. His maid, Mrs. Evelyn Harper, quietly moved about the suite with her cleaning supplies. She was a petite woman in her late 60s with graying hair tied neatly into a bun. Her hands were worn from years of hard work, but her smile always carried warmth. For over 2 decades, she had worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families, like the Langleys, earning barely enough to make ends meet. Evelyn hummed softly to herself as she dusted the shelves, careful not to disturb Marcus. She knew better than to engage him unless necessary. He rarely acknowledged her presence, treating her more like furniture than a person. Today, however, something snapped inside him. As Evelyn bent down to pick up a crumpled napkin near his feet, Marcus let out a scoff. "You know," he said loudly, breaking the silence, "people like you should be grateful someone like me even lets you step foot in here." Evelyn froze momentarily before continuing her task without responding. She had heard such remarks before, not just from Marcus but from many others like him. Still, each word stung a little more than the last. Marcus leaned back against the couch, smirking at his own cleverness. "Seriously, do you have any idea what this place costs? I could buy 10 houses with what I pay for this view. And yet, here you are, acting like you belong." His tone dripped with mockery, laced with disdain. Evelyn straightened up slowly, clutching her duster tightly. Her voice remained calm, though there was a flicker of hurt in her eyes. "Mr. Langley, I don't mean no disrespect, but I'm just doing my job, that's all." "Oh, spare me the humility act," Marcus shot back dismissively. "You think working for minimum wage makes you noble or something? Newsflash, it doesn't. People like you will never understand real success." With that, he waved her away, signaling the end of their conversation. Evelyn nodded silently and returned to her duties, her movements slower now, weighed down by invisible burdens. As she worked, she couldn't help but wonder why some people equated wealth with superiority. Meanwhile, Marcus smirked to himself, feeling satisfied with his display of dominance. Little did he know, karma had already begun its quiet march toward his door. By evening, the penthouse gleamed under Evelyn's care, but the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. Unbeknownst to Marcus, the events of the day would soon spiral far beyond anything he could control. And somewhere out there, fate was preparing a knock on his suite door that would change everything, for both of them. As Evelyn finished cleaning Marcus's penthouse, she packed her supplies into a worn-out tote bag and headed toward the elevator. The weight of his words lingered in her mind like an unwelcome shadow. She had faced insults before, many times, but something about Marcus's cruel remarks cut deeper than usual. Perhaps it was the casualness with which he delivered them, as if tearing someone down was nothing more than a game to him. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Evelyn leaned against the wall, clutching her bag tightly. Her thoughts drifted back to her youth when life seemed simpler. She remembered growing up in a small town where neighbors looked out for one another, sharing meals and laughter despite their hardships. Back then, kindness mattered more than wealth. But now, standing in this towering skyscraper surrounded by luxury, she couldn't help but feel invisible, an insignificant cog in a machine driven by greed and arrogance. When she stepped outside, the cool night air greeted her like an old friend. Evelyn walked slowly along the sidewalk, her shoes clicking softly against the pavement. Streetlights cast soft glows over the city streets, illuminating patches of humanity that contrasted sharply with the world Marcus inhabited. Homeless individuals, huddled under blankets near alleyways, while young couples laughed freely at outdoor cafes. Life went on, indifferent to the struggles of those caught between privilege and poverty. Evelyn lived in a modest apartment tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom space filled with secondhand furniture, but it was hers. As she unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of lavender welcomed her home. She set her bag down and sank onto the couch, staring at the framed photo on the coffee table. It was a picture of her late husband James smiling warmly beside her. They had shared 30 wonderful years together before illness took him away. "James," she whispered softly, "I don't know why I let people like him get to me." She sighed deeply, running her fingers over the edge of the frame. Memories flooded back. Memories of James reminding her of her worth whenever doubt crept in. He used to say, "Evie, you're stronger than you think. Don't let anyone make you forget your value." Those words had carried her through some of her darkest days, yet tonight, they felt distant, drowned out by Marcus's cutting remarks. Meanwhile, miles away in his penthouse suite, Marcus lounged on his balcony sipping expensive whiskey. The city lights sparkled below him like scattered diamonds. To anyone else, he appeared untouchable, a man who had everything money could buy. But deep down, Marcus often felt empty. Wealth brought comfort, yes, but not fulfillment. His relationships were shallow, built on mutual benefit rather than genuine connection. Friends came and went, drawn to his success but rarely staying once the novelty wore off. Tonight, however, his encounter with Evelyn replayed in his mind. For reasons he couldn't explain, her quiet dignity unsettled him. Most people would have snapped back or stormed out after being spoken to the way he'd treated her, but Evelyn simply continued her work without complaint, leaving him feeling oddly unsatisfied. Was it guilt? Or perhaps envy? Either way, the thought gnawed at him. As Marcus drained the last sip of whiskey, he decided to push the incident aside. After all, what did it matter? He paid Evelyn well enough for her time, didn't he? People like her existed to serve people like him. That was the natural order of things, or so he believed. But fate has a way of challenging even the strongest convictions. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Evelyn woke early, as she always did, preparing herself mentally for another day of work. Little did she know, today would be different. Not just for her, but for Marcus too. Because waiting outside his penthouse suite was a visitor who would force both of them to confront truths they had long ignored. And as the knock echoed through the halls of the high-rise building, neither Evelyn nor Marcus realized how much their lives were about to change. The next morning, Marcus woke up to the soft hum of his coffee machine brewing his favorite espresso blend. He stretched lazily on his king-sized bed, feeling no urgency to start the day. Life moved at his pace. Meetings could wait, calls could be postponed, and responsibilities were merely suggestions. As he sipped his coffee while scrolling through emails on his phone, a sharp knock echoed through the suite. At first, Marcus ignored it, assuming it was Evelyn arriving early for her shift. But when the knocking persisted louder this time, curiosity got the better of him. Setting his cup down, he walked toward the door, his bare feet padding against the cold marble floor. "Who is it?" he called out, irritation creeping into his voice. No response came except another firm knock. Frowning, Marcus unlocked the door and swung it open, ready to snap at whoever dared disturb him. But the person standing there was not Evelyn or anyone he expected. A tall, distinguished man in his late 50s stood outside, dressed in a tailored navy suit that screamed authority. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed back, and his piercing gray eyes locked onto Marcus with an intensity that made him take a step back. The man held a leather briefcase in one hand and exuded an air of calm confidence. "Good morning, Mr. Langley," the man said smoothly, his deep voice carrying a hint of formality. "May I come in?" Marcus hesitated, thrown off balance by the unexpected visit. "Who are you?" he asked cautiously, his usual bravado faltering under the stranger's unwavering gaze. "My name is Charles Whitaker," the man replied, producing a business card from his pocket. "I'm here on behalf of Mrs. Evelyn Harper." Marcus glanced at the card but didn't bother reading it. Instead, he frowned, confused. "Evelyn? What does she have to do with you?" Charles stepped forward slightly, his expression unreadable. "That's what we need to discuss. May I come inside?" Reluctantly, Marcus stepped aside, allowing the man to enter. He gestured toward the living area, where Charles took a seat without waiting for an invitation. Marcus remained standing, arms crossed over his chest, his mind racing with questions. "What's going on?" Marcus demanded, his tone sharper now. "If this is about yesterday—" "It is about yesterday," Charles interrupted calmly, meeting Marcus's glare with steady eyes. "But perhaps not in the way you're thinking." Marcus scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Look, if Evelyn sent you here because she's upset about some comment I made, then tell her I don't have time for this nonsense. She works for me, not the other way around." Charles leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus carefully. Then with deliberate slowness, he opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Placing it on the glass coffee table between them, he slid it toward Marcus. "This isn't about hurt feelings," Charles said evenly. "Take a look at these documents. They concern Evelyn, and indirectly, you as well." Intrigued, despite himself, Marcus picked up the folder and flipped it open. Inside were legal papers, photographs, and handwritten notes. At first glance, they seemed unrelated, but as Marcus skimmed through the contents, his brow furrowed in confusion. What is all this?" he stammered, flipping through page after page. There were property deeds, financial statements, and even letters addressed to Evelyn. One document caught his attention, a faded photograph of a young Evelyn standing beside a man who bore a striking resemblance to Marcus himself. Charles watched silently as realization began to dawn on Marcus's face. When Marcus finally looked up, his expression was a mix of disbelief and unease. "Who are you?" Marcus repeated, his voice quieter now, tinged with uncertainty. Charles smiled faintly, leaning forward. "As I said before, Mr. Langley, I represent Evelyn Harper, and today you're going to learn something about her and yourself that will change everything." For once, Marcus Langley was speechless. Whatever he had expected when he opened his door that morning, it certainly wasn't this. After Charles Whitaker left, Marcus remained seated in the same spot for what felt like hours. The weight of the revelation pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. He stared at the scattered documents on the table, the birth certificate, the photographs, and the letters, all pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed until now. His mind raced with questions, doubts, and emotions he couldn't quite name. For years, Marcus had prided himself on being self-made, someone who clawed his way out of foster care to build an empire. But now, that identity felt shaken. What did it mean to discover that the woman he'd mocked and dismissed was actually his mother? How could he reconcile the image of Evelyn, the humble maid, with the role she played in his life before he even knew her? He picked up the faded photograph again, studying it more closely this time. In the picture, Evelyn looked younger, radiant even, holding a baby who must have been him. Her smile was warm, her eyes filled with love. It was a side of her Marcus had never seen, or perhaps had refused to see. His thoughts drifted back to their encounters over the months she'd worked for him. She had always been respectful, diligent, and kind, even when he treated her poorly. Now those interactions took on new meaning. Had she recognized him somehow? Did she carry the burden of their shared past silently while enduring his insults? The guilt began to creep in, gnawing at the edges of his conscience. Marcus wasn't used to feeling remorse. He had spent most of his life avoiding accountability. But this was different. This wasn't about losing a business deal or offending a colleague. It was personal. Deeply personal. Unable to sit still any longer, Marcus stood and paced the length of the suite. His penthouse, once a symbol of triumph, suddenly felt hollow. The marble floors, the gold fixtures, the panoramic views. All of it seemed meaningless compared to the storm raging inside him. For the first time, he questioned whether his wealth and success truly defined him. Eventually, exhaustion overtook him, and he collapsed onto the couch. Picking up his phone, he scrolled through his contacts until he found Evelyn's number. She had provided it during her hiring process, though he had never needed to use it before. As he stared at the digits, his thumb hovered over the call button. Should he reach out? What would he even say? Before he could decide, his phone buzzed unexpectedly. It was a text message from Evelyn herself. "Mr. Langley, I hope you're doing well. If you need anything, please let me know." The simplicity of the message struck him. No demands, no accusations, just quiet concern. Marcus exhaled sharply, realizing how much grace she extended despite everything. Instead of replying immediately, he decided to visit her apartment. He needed answers, but more importantly, he needed to face her, to confront the truth head-on. Grabbing his keys and jacket, he left the penthouse, stepping into the elevator with a mix of apprehension and determination. When Marcus arrived at Evelyn's modest building, he hesitated outside her door. The contrast between her world and his couldn't have been starker. While his home gleamed with luxury, hers was tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, its walls painted in soft pastels and adorned with potted plants. Taking a deep breath, he knocked gently. Evelyn opened the door moments later, her expression shifting from surprise to concern as she saw him standing there. "Mr. Langley?" she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Is everything all right?" Marcus swallowed hard, unsure where to begin. But one thing was clear. Whatever happened next, he owed her honesty and respect. "I came here because we need to talk," he said finally, meeting her gaze. "About everything." Evelyn nodded slowly, stepping aside to let him in. Inside her cozy apartment, surrounded by memories and mementos, the two sat down together, and for the first time they began to unravel the tangled threads of their shared history. Evelyn's apartment was small but warm, filled with the scent of lavender and freshly baked bread. The walls were adorned with family photographs, smiling, faces frozen in time, and a few potted plants sat on the windowsill basking in the sunlight. Marcus felt out of place, his expensive suit and polished shoes contrasting sharply with the simplicity of her home. Yet there was an undeniable comfort here, a sense of belonging that his penthouse had never offered. They sat across from each other at a modest wooden table, the air thick with unspoken words. Evelyn clasped her hands tightly in her lap, her knuckles white as she braced herself for whatever Marcus had come to say. "I know," Marcus began, his voice low and hesitant. "I know about us." Evelyn's eyes widened slightly, though she didn't seem entirely surprised. She nodded slowly, her lips trembling as she searched for the right words. "I wondered if Charles would tell you," she admitted softly. "But I hoped he wouldn't. I didn't want this to happen like this, not after everything." Marcus leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why keep it a secret all these years?" Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes, but she blinked them away, determined to stay strong. "Because I was scared, Marcus," she said, using his first name for the first time. Her voice carried a mix of pain and vulnerability. "When they took you away from me, I thought I'd lost you forever. I tried so hard to find you when you grew older, but every lead ended in disappointment. And then, when I finally saw your face again, working in your home, I couldn't bring myself to say anything. You were doing so well, living such a successful life. What could I possibly offer you? A mother who gave you up, who let the system take you away." Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. Marcus listened intently, his anger softening, as he realized the depth of her sacrifice. For years he had assumed she abandoned him without a second thought, but now, hearing her story, he understood how much love and heartache had gone into that decision. "I treated you horribly," Marcus confessed, his voice cracking under the weight of his guilt. "All those things I said to you, they were cruel. If I had known." Evelyn reached across the table, placing a gentle hand over his. "You didn't know," she said firmly. And none of that matters now. What matters is that we're here, talking honestly for the first time. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was healing. Marcus looked around the room, noticing the framed photo of a young boy on the shelf. It was unmistakably him, captured during one of the rare, happy moments in foster care. Evelyn followed his gaze and smiled faintly. "I kept every picture I could find," she explained. "Every article about your achievements. Watching you succeed from afar, it gave me hope. Even if I couldn't be part of your life, I wanted you to know someone was proud of you." Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. All his life he had craved validation, seeking approval from peers and mentors alike. Yet the person who had believed in him most had been silently cheering him on from the shadows. "There's so much I don't understand," Marcus admitted. "About you, about me, about us. But I want to try. Can we start over?" Evelyn's smile widened, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "We can start over." As they talked late into the evening, sharing stories and piecing together fragments of their lives, something remarkable happened. The walls Marcus had built around himself began to crumble, replaced by a newfound sense of connection. And Evelyn, for the first time in decades, allowed herself to dream of a future where her son might truly forgive her. Little did they know, their journey was far from over. In the weeks that followed, Marcus and Evelyn began to rebuild their relationship, one tentative step at a time. It wasn't easy. Decades of separation couldn't be undone overnight, but both were determined to make it work. For Marcus, this meant reevaluating not just his connection with Evelyn, but also the way he viewed the world around him. For Evelyn, it was about healing old wounds and daring to believe she deserved happiness after years of carrying guilt. Marcus started by inviting Evelyn to dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown. At first she hesitated, worried about being seen in public together or causing him embarrassment. But Marcus insisted, telling her firmly, "You're my mother, Evelyn. There's nothing embarrassing about that." The evening was simple yet profound. They laughed over shared memories Evelyn had pieced together from articles and interviews about Marcus's rise to success. She told stories about her late husband, James, who had always encouraged her to keep searching for her son. Marcus listened, intently, realizing how much strength she must have drawn from those who loved her during difficult times. As they grew closer, Marcus found himself changing in ways he never anticipated. He became less focused on material wealth and more interested in building meaningful relationships. He started visiting Evelyn regularly, helping her with household chores, something he would have scoffed at before, and even accompanying her to church on Sundays. The congregation welcomed him warmly, unaware of his past arrogance, and Marcus felt a sense of community he'd never experienced in his high-rise penthouse. One day, while sorting through some old boxes in Evelyn's attic, they stumbled upon a journal she had kept when Marcus was a baby. Its pages were filled with heartfelt entries detailing her hopes and dreams for him. Reading them aloud brought tears to both their eyes. "I wanted you to grow up knowing you were loved," Evelyn said softly, clutching the worn notebook. "Even if I couldn't be there, I prayed someone else would show you that." Marcus nodded, overwhelmed by emotion. "You did," he replied. "Through everything, you showed me what real love looks like." Inspired by their journey, Marcus decided to use his resources to give back to others. He launched a foundation aimed at supporting single mothers and children in foster care, naming it after Evelyn. When reporters asked why he chose this cause, Marcus simply smiled and said, "Because everyone deserves a second chance." Evelyn attended the foundation's launch event, standing proudly beside her son as cameras flashed and applause filled the room. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not as a maid or a struggling mother, but as a woman whose sacrifices had shaped something extraordinary. Their bond continued to deepen, becoming a source of strength for both of them. Marcus learned humility, patience, and gratitude, qualities he realized were far more valuable than any amount of money. And Evelyn discovered joy in reconnecting with the son she thought she'd lost forever. Though their lives remained different in many ways, they no longer let those differences define them. Instead, they embraced the beauty of their shared history, flaws and all. Together, they proved that forgiveness and love could bridge even the widest gaps. And so, in a city known for its glittering skyline and relentless pursuit of success, two hearts found redemption, not in wealth or status, but in each other. Their story served as a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected connections are the ones that change us the most.